Hello friends and enemies. So in today's video, in the spirit of fairness, I thought I ought to discuss anti-vegan liberal talking points. For those of you who keep up with my videos, you'll know that I have made many anti-vegan conservative talking points videos, one of which was one I did on the Rebel Media. The Rebel Media has since gotten that video taken down by striking a very false copyright strike on it. So once I make the necessary changes to that video to get it so I can re-upload it, I want to make one thing clear. Most people in the world aren't vegan. Like what, 1 or 2%? I think we all know this. So naturally there will be plenty of left-leaning people who attack veganism. They're not different from conservatives in this way. I just think it'd be interesting and useful to examine how these criticisms differ, because not all criticisms of veganism are created equally. So I immediately want to point out that there's actually not very many left-tubers talking about veganism, especially when compared to more right-wing YouTubers. I have a theory as to why this is, and I won't leave you in suspense. I suspect it's because left-leaning people, and from now on, whenever I say left-leaning or right-leaning or conservative or liberal, you can assume that I'm speaking in generalities. I know that we're all very special snowflakes, and if you identify as conservative or liberal and I say something about that group that you don't identify with, I totally recognize that you exist. Don't worry. So yeah, with that being said, typically left-leaning people don't find the idea of veganism offensive. At worst, they typically just don't care about it, even though they should. Whereas more conservative people tend to go out of their way to tell you that veganism is stupid and you're stupid for being vegan and that you ought not to be vegan. This has just been my experience as someone who has watched many anti-vegan conservative videos, that this is a reoccurring trend. I mean, heck, you even suggest to some conservatives that they ought to just reduce their animal product consumption, just be a reducitarian for their own health, and even that gets them all angry. So why is this? It's probably multifaceted. I suspect that a lot of conservatives view veganism as a liberal thing, and you know those liberals, they got everything backwards. Don't you know that humans are not cows, that we're worth more than cows? God, after all, did not make cows in his image. Thank you very much. And I think being generally more traditional probably has something to do with it as well. It's not that liberals don't see themselves as better than animals in whichever way they want to justify, you know, intelligence though, consciousness though, no moral agency though. They see themselves as superior in some way. It's just that it's not as essential or crucial to their identity as it is with conservatives. As I've mentioned many times in the past, conservatives tend to value what they perceive to be natural hierarchies, and humans are at the very top. So I don't want anyone accusing me of cherry picking. It's just that there's not very many videos for me to examine. If you know of a prominent left-tuber who's made some criticisms or some attacks on veganism, please let me know, because that would actually be very helpful. So let's look at our first video, and this one's by the Young Turks. Imposing vegan diet could land parents in prison.
Lawmakers in Italy are drafting a law that could put parents in prison if they impose veganism on their children, and that leads to them being malnourished. 4 cases in the last 18 months where children who were raised to be vegans suffered from malnutrition. And so now they're in a panic and they're like, oh my God, we have to go after the vegans. No, just go after the parents who are neglecting their kids or who aren't feeding their kids properly.
It's people who want to protect their culture. And so in Italy, eating is a huge part of the culture.
Yes.
And so my guess is that there's a backlash to all these vegans. And so people are on the warpath trying to find out what you see, we knew it wasn't right. We knew we were right and they were wrong.
So I think that they have a very reasonable take on this situation. This is totally something that I would say, and I know a lot of other vegans would say. And the response is a lot better than what the mainstream media was writing about it. I know a few news outlets, they wrote about how a vegan diet is super risky for children and went on about that. And then at the very end, they had a little caveat that said, well, actually, a vegan diet, when it's well balanced and appropriately planned, is totally suitable for children. And the comment section in this video is pretty good as well. The only real dissenting comments were about how a vegan diet isn't actually suitable for children, and I'm not really surprised because this is a very common myth. But this is just one video, so let's go on to the next. The next video is again by the Young Turks, and this one is called Jenko's Vegan. So they
Obviously.
Definitely not.
Right.
No, I just feel like this momentum towards veganism, like it's building. Like I'm getting more and more pressure, and more and more people are becoming vegan, and then the food is getting better.
That's certainly true.
Yeah.
There are more and more options. There are more and more analogs to things that you could eat, like burgers and sausages and other stuff.
So have you had that Impossible Burger?
Oh yeah, I've had that. Now, for me, the Impossible Burger is too salty, but I love the Beyond Burger.
We've had that conversation, Mark, about the Beyond Burger. I love the Beyond
It is.
Burger.
The Beyond Burger is beyond
Yeah.
anything. It's so good.
It's not,
actually talk very positively about veganism. They even have a vegan on the panel, and they talk about the Beyond Meat Burger in a very positive manner. Contrast this with Ezra Levant. I did a segment on him in my now deleted Rebel Media video, but Ezra Levant, a conservative commentator, he feels personally victimized by the mere idea of a veggie burger. On to the next video. This is the last one by the Young Turks. Is Cenk unethical for eating meat?
And I get it. I'm a bad guy for being a meat eater, but I do love it, and I confess to that. I agree with you that in 100 years they'll judge us for what we have done, and they'll say they knew. Cenk knew. He had JC on. JC told him. The part I guess that I don't know, and is a sticking point for me, is does their consciousness count? And maybe it's an absurd thing for me to emphasize, but I do emphasize it.
So in this video, he totally acknowledges that he could be wrong about not being vegan, and he actually poses our first criticism of veganism by someone on the left, and that's consciousness, though. He doubts how conscious animals are, and if this makes them morally relevant, or if we should give them the same moral consideration. And the guy he has on the panel actually gives him a pretty good answer, I think. He says that we all accept that dogs and cats ought not to be tortured and killed, and farm animals certainly have the same level of consciousness as them, or at least the same. Maybe pigs have even higher levels since they're more intelligent. Who knows? But they have at least the same amount. Thus, it makes sense that we ought to extend to them the same amount of moral consideration. Let's move on from the Young Turks entirely, and let's discuss a video by H Bomber Guy called Soy Boy Diet Aftermath. Wow, Soy Boy Diet, say that 10 times fast. So this video was a reaction to Paul Joseph Watson's claims that soy is feminizing the West. Now, why would Paul say this? For those of you who don't know who this person is, bless your hearts. He is a hard-right conservative commentator who mostly talks about the degradation of Western culture in the culture war. He probably perceives soy and meat replacement products as anti-meat, which he probably perceives as anti-male and anti-conservative. This was my first speculation, but we don't even have to speculate about it because in his video, The Truth About Soy Boys, his first line is literally this.
Is soy food consumption turning men into pussies and making them more likely to adopt left-wing beliefs? Soy boys.
So H Bomber Guy responded with a little experiment, and I won't spoil the whole thing for you. I'll link the video down below. It's very entertaining. I recommend you watch it. But basically, he came to this conclusion about soy.
Basically, I proved exactly what everyone expected this would prove in the most boring and straightforward way possible. It turns out that soybeans are just a kind of bean that you can eat.
And I think this is worth bringing up because, again, like, you never see political conservative commentators or anyone who just identifies conservative on the internet talk even neutrally about soy. So many people hate soy and meat replacements, so this is very noteworthy. But listen, I totally realize that paying lip service to veganism is not enough. If you aren't vegan, you're paying for animal abuse regardless of where you are in the political spectrum and regardless of how you talk about the topic. These left-leaning YouTubers are just as bad when it comes to animal abuse as all the Ezras and the Pauls in the world. I just think it's interesting to look at the differences between these two groups. So at this point in my research, I realized that if I wanted to find some real left-leaning criticisms of veganism, I was gonna have to get off YouTube and go to a place I swore I would avoid at all costs. Woke Twitter. V-gang, in a way, woke Twitter is the most irritating commentary on veganism, more so than any of the conservative commentary I've looked at, which I know is a strong statement because, trust me, we've looked at some ridiculous stuff. I'm dead serious about this. It's so irritating, but you don't have to take my word for it. let's examine it together. But before we begin, I think it would be pragmatic for me to point out that woke Twitter is also very concerned with hierarchies. While conservatives tend to perceive these hierarchies as natural and that we ought to be preserving them, woke Twitter views these hierarchies as social constructions and we ought to be dismantling them. So it took me about 2 seconds on woke Twitter to find this anti-vegan tweet. Demonizing anyone who eats meat is anti-indigenous. It makes you an asshole. And some people have eating disorders. Take your superiority complex and shove it up your ass. AVTD responds with, not to mention classist! Veganism is not affordable, and when it is affordable, incredibly inaccessible. In most cases, it's both. And Surta BB responds with, I would love to be vegan. Of course he would. But between my stomach issues and depression, my options are too limited for the amount of energy I have available to put into meals. It's a sad truth, but it's a reality I have to put myself and my health first. So you can see that the nature of these criticisms differ vastly from their conservative counterparts. Woke Twitter is primarily concerned with people of color, First Nations people, working class people, people with disabilities, and so on. And of course, this is all so easily debunked, and it's being used as a distraction. This person who's tweeting about how vegans are the worst because Indigenous people, though, they themselves aren't Indigenous, so why are you bringing this up? It's almost like they're just using it as an excuse to not go vegan. And also it totally ignores the experiences of Indigenous vegans, but like whatever, go off. Katrina Dent says, I'm Métis, Mohawk, and we own a lake in Sudbury, Ontario and a bait shop. I am vegan. Eating animals is wrong when we have the choice to not eat them. Stop speaking for Indigenous peoples. Thank you. And Canines, though, that's a funny name, responds with, it's factory farm meat that's hurting Indigenous people, exacerbating climate change, destroying rainforests. They're the first victims of natural disasters and are hit the hardest. Supporting Indigenous people is going vegan where possible. And I thought that was a really good point, so I just wanted to bring that up. And all of these things, the same thing can be said about poor vegans. They absolutely do exist, and saying that poor people, oh, they can't possibly go vegan is totally ignoring their experiences. The truth of the matter is, canned foods, beans, rice, bread, pasta, these are the cheapest foods you can buy. And don't think that I've forgotten about food deserts. The definition of a food desert is an urban area where people don't have access to fresh foods. Someone please tell me what nutrients are missing in a can of beans, rice, bread, foods you can buy at convenience stores that you could only find in a cheeseburger with fries and a pop. And on top of that, you can buy vegan food at fast food restaurants nowadays. It's pretty common and pretty accessible. But listen, I am not ignoring the fact that for working class people or lower income households, the barrier to entry to veganism is a lot higher. And I think we as vegans and just as decent people in general, this is something we ought to be concerned about. I'm actually planning on making a video on this topic in the future, and in that video I want to discuss this further and also hopefully provide some practical tips for everyone that can get us all to help this situation. And lastly, disabled people though. I find this one particularly interesting because I find left-leaning people are way more likely to talk about their health problems on the internet, probably because there's less stigma in these spaces, but I also find that this is often used as a get out of jail free card. Like, oh, don't you know I'm allergic to soy and wheat? Well, did you even research veganism for 5 minutes on Google? Did you even try going vegan? Did you talk to your doctor? I have sympathy for people who genuinely cannot eat 100% fully plant-based. There are some certain digestive conditions like Crohn's disease. I'm sure there's others. I'm not a doctor. And, I fully sympathize with these people. And I know that there are people with this disease who try to eat as vegan as possible, and they live vegan in every other area of their life beyond diet. So these people who are claiming, oh, I would love to go vegan except I have some disease. Oh, okay, so you're eating as plant-based as possible, you don't buy anything tested on animals, you never go to the zoo or the circus or SeaWorld. And what I find so irritating about woke Twitter is that these people go on and on about oppressed groups, which is fine. However, Once something actually requires a change in their behavior, it requires an actual sacrifice, suddenly vegans are the insensitive bad guys. It's so easy to just go off on the internet about racism and sexism, which is like, fine, you know, these are bad things, and it's fine to express that you think these are bad things. It's just totally insincere though, because most likely these people weren't racist and sexist to begin with. So talking about how you ought not to be racist and sexist, it makes them look like a good person with zero effort. But going vegan, oh, no, not possible. Not possible. That requires behavioral changes, and they don't want to do that. How are you going to change the world when you can't even change what you eat for breakfast? It is the truth that left-leaning people are more likely to go vegan. And I've done many videos on this, but I also conducted a super scientific poll with absolutely zero confounding factors on my Instagram story where I asked you guys if you identify as conservative, and 90% of you said no. This was not surprising to me. I think we owe it to all the non-vegans in this world to give them that chance, because it's not their fault that they've been brainwashed by society to believe that animals are here for us to use and exploit and kill. They deserve the chance to wake up and see the lie that's been hidden in front of them in plain sight. This goes for anyone across the political spectrum. And that's why I make these videos, so we can better understand how to talk about veganism with different types of people. If you have a family member or a friend who you know is a hard conservative, maybe after watching all these videos, you'll have a better understanding of how they're thinking and how they're approaching the topic. And maybe rather than starting off with how animals deserve to live just like us, you can start with the health topic and how a vegan diet is super healthy. Or if you know someone who's a bleeding heart liberal, maybe you can talk with how speciesism is just another form of oppression, and animals are more similar to us than they are different, and just because they have different physical bodies doesn't mean we have the right to exploit them. And that's everything I have to say about that. Thank you so much for watching. I will say that about 34% of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed. So if all of you subscribe to my channel, I would definitely make it over the 10,000 subscriber mark. So just putting that idea in your head. Do what you want though. Please leave your comments down below. I love reading your comments. Some of you leave such thoughtful, grammatically correct comments, and they're such a joy to read. I try to respond to as many comments as possible, but even if I happen to not get back to you, I've probably read it. No, I've certainly read it, and it's super appreciated. Even if you don't have anything to say, even just dropping an emoji or a smiley face or something down in the comment section will help me out. It will give me an advantage with YouTube's algorithms, so feel free to do that as well. Anything helps. And if you'd like to partake in future Instagram polls, go follow me on Instagram. And until next time, I'll see you in the next one.